Ever since the debut of Star Wars in 1977, the franchise has been a cultural phenomenon. Over the decades, it has inspired countless fans, shaped the science fiction genre, and influenced the entire film industry. However, in recent years, the franchise's identity has become increasingly fractured, plagued by divisive and half-baked storytelling decisions, corporate interference, and an oversaturation of mediocre to downright laughably bad content. In this video, I'd like to examine how the once beloved Star Wars franchise has come to be irreparably broken, with its core essence diluted and its loyal fan base splintered. As someone who has in recent years been covering the lore and history of science fiction and fantasy franchises, I've come to realize that all fictional properties fall into one of two groups. In order to determine which group they belong to, one simple question needs to be answered. Where does the canon live? After I was introduced as a child to the wider mythos of Star Wars through the expanded universe books, I quickly realized how the hierarchy of lore within this property differed from other fictional works. In the Star Wars Legendarium, the canon and universally accepted lore has always lived on the screen. If ever there was a conflict between what I saw on film and what I read in an official Star Wars novel, the on-screen presentation would take precedence. This became abundantly clear in George Lucas's prequel films, which contradicted several details in novels that had been written prior to their release. Star Wars is not unique in this area. Many other historically successful fictional IPs like Stargate or Star Trek have content that spans across multiple avenues of media. The lore of those universes functions in much the same way as Star Wars. However, the primary issue with this particular hierarchy of lore arises when great care is not taken with each on-screen addition to the franchise. In a primarily on-screen canonical property like Star Wars, when careless or clumsy attempts are put forth, what results is often an upheaval and dividing of the fanbase, propagating massive apathy that can actually damage the entire IP. It can help to contrast the on-screen canon approach to other fictional universes like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, or Frank Herbert's Dune. In those legendariums, the lore and canon lies off-screen. Primarily, this is because those IPs were carefully built by a single visionary mind and were first introduced to the world in written form. Consequently, when an on-screen piece of media is presented that deviates wildly from the spirit or structure of the source material, while that offering will likely be scorned and derided by pre-existing fans, the IP itself is shielded from any major damage. For instance, after the release of Amazon's Rings of Power, very few, if any, of the already established fans have blackpilled on Tolkien's original Middle-earth writings. Or another example, while David Lynch's Dune took many controversial creative liberties and deviated from the source material, that did not stop most fans from appreciating his novels or from being excited and happy to support any further on-screen adaptations or expansions of stories told in his universe. A primary reason why these controversial on-screen adaptations fail to negatively impact the source material is that they are viewed as separate and distinct and largely isolated from the lore. Fans of those properties will always have the original source material to fall back on, and each subsequent adaptation or new story that is attempted to be told within that world has a chance at being more faithful to the lore and spirit of the original work. One reason why I believe that Star Wars is irreparably broken is their inability to reset. Because there is no original source material from which the lore is taken, each new canon-breaking element that is introduced muddies the timeline and breaks the laws and rules that govern the Star Wars universe. This was originally an issue I noticed with the prequel films, which famously deviated from events and elements that had already been established in the original trilogy. Over time, however, fans were able to come up with explanations to most of these deviations in an attempt to patch up what had become a somewhat fractured continuity. However, the perceived plot holes in the prequels were made to look minuscule and nearly inconsequential in comparison to the blatant disregard and destruction of many long-established canonical elements in Disney's sequel trilogy. And since then, with the dozens of hours of live-action Disney Plus Star Wars content, any hope for a cohesive continuity continues to degrade to a level that is far past the point of reconciliation. Therefore, with the current state of Star Wars, fans are forced to suspend logic and dismiss any expectation of continuity in order to fully enjoy new content. But aside from the ongoing canonical issues with the Star Wars IP, the primary cause for the franchise's recent decline is the continued splintering of the fan base. Many would agree that the fan base was already somewhat split before Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm between prequel and original trilogy fans. However, Disney's additions to the Star Wars universe have only proven to further divide the fandom. When Disney announced its intention to produce new Star Wars films, it was widely understood that changes to the existing expanded universe of novels, comics, and other media would be necessary. However, the decision to completely discard the EU was met with considerable backlash from fans who had invested time, money, and emotion into these stories. By dismissing the EU, Disney alienated a significant portion of the fan base that had kept the flame of Star Wars alive during the franchise's dormant years. Many longtime fans felt betrayed by Disney's decision, believing that the company had prioritized profits over the integrity of the franchise. In contrast, newer fans who may not have been as familiar with the EU welcomed the opportunity to explore a fresh continuity. In an attempt to cater to the various factions, the creatives at Disney Lucasfilm decided to cherry-pick certain elements of the EU while forging a new path forward. This approach has led to a weakened version of Star Wars that often feels derivative and uninspired. For example, Disney has reintroduced characters and concepts from the EU, such as Grand Admiral Thrawn and the story of Boba Fett's adventures after surviving the Sarlacc pit. However, these reintroductions prove to lack the depth and complexity of their original incarnations. In addition, Disney's continued attempts to cater to each fragmented group within the Star Wars fandom has greatly contributed to the continued breaking of the franchise, robbing it of any semblance of identity. By trying to please everyone, Lucasfilm has only proven to alienate both new and old fans alike, as neither group can be truly satisfied. Recently, in an interview with comicbook.com, there has been a confirmation from Jon Favreau, the showrunner of The Mandalorian, that the studio will continue to embrace the fragmentation of the Star Wars fandom.
I think we're always looking to all of Star Wars, and I think that each generation connects with a different aspect of it. I was 10 when the first movie came out, so I have the deepest connection with those characters. But now, dealing with people who are millennials, the prequels are theirs. And, Clone Wars for younger, Gen Z has Clone Wars, has the sequels. And then there's even the EU for those of us who lived through the moments where there wasn't a lot of Star Wars, and there was Star Wars being generated around games and around books and comics. So we like to pull everybody together, and much like at the conventions, when you go to the conventions, you have people from all different parts of the world dressing up as different characters, all having a ball together. And I think that really captures what my experience has been with the fans. And so we try to just acknowledge and draw in as much as we can, and kind of give acknowledgments to that we're paying attention to everything going on in Star Wars and try to include it in the show.
On its face, this approach might seem like a logical way to keep the fan base engaged and interested in the franchise. However, the problem with this approach is that it leads to a watered-down product. While it's essential to listen to feedback from the fans, it's also important to have a clear vision for the franchise. Ultimately, the divided fan base weakens the core identity of Star Wars, making it difficult for any one creative team to tell cohesive stories that resonate with all fans. As a result, the Star Wars universe has quickly turned into a hodgepodge of disjointed ideas, with no clear sense of purpose or direction. Sadly, it appears that anyone who wishes to tell more stories in the Star Wars universe under Disney and Lucasfilm's oversight will be forced to embrace their mess of continuity. The evidence behind the reasons for the current broken state of the IP indicates that these problems are systemic rather than isolated incidents. Without a clear vision and direction, and with so many chefs in the kitchen, so to speak, the Star Wars universe is bound to remain an unrecognizable mess, with each new entry causing further dilution of its once rich mythos. But I'm curious to know what you think of the current state of Disney Star Wars. Is the IP destined to remain broken, or is there hope that they can reverse the franchise's steady decline? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe for more sci-fi and fantasy news and lore. Thank you all so much for your support, and as always, have a very nerdy day.